You're tuned into WRFG 89.3 FM. My name is Diane Mathowitz, and this is the second part of the Labor Forum. Paul McLennan and I are just so pleased to invite and have here on the studio two of the leaders of the AFL-CIO. Like big guys, but good friends. So I want to welcome DeLayne Adams and Charles Clark. Hi.
Hello, Diane.
Thanks for having us.
Okay, so let me start by doing your credentials. So now DeLayne has been on the program pretty recently, as a matter of fact, and he is the, if I have this correct, Southern Regional Field Communications Coordinator of the AFL-CIO,
Correct.
which is the National Federation of Unions here in the United States, and he covers 13 states. Seated next to him is Charles Clark. Charles is even a bigger wheel.
Can't go by name.
He is the Southern Regional Director for the AFL-CIO, which means that for 12 states, he is responsible for organizing resources, etc., to make sure that the drive for workers' rights is successful.
That's correct.
Okay. All right. All right, so we invited both of you here because we've been having conversations on the Labor Forum and this part of the program for the last couple of weeks, ever since the massacre in Charleston. And both Paul and I are longtime activists in our own unions, but in the whole worker struggle in general. And as longtime worker activists in the South in particular, we have always, the two of us, have been engaged in trying to alter, to move the consciousness of, in particular, white workers about the issue of racism and how important the struggle against any form of discrimination is in maintaining and developing and building the kind of worker solidarity that actually can have us win. It's so important that we should win against all these attacks. So in conversation with DeLayne, I had heard, and with Charles, I'd heard about some initiatives that the AFL-CIO is going to take. And that's why we wanted to have you both here, because it's really important that this conversation take place in union halls and restaurants and people's dining rooms, and of course on a program like the Labor Forum, which is attempting to really address working people in general, all over, and take the issues that they face in their communities and see how belonging to a union can improve and make that better. So that's kind of the background of this. So I want to ask both of you just to kind of comment on it. You both have very important positions in the South in terms of union organizing. So maybe we could ask to start what you think the impact of the Charleston massacre is having on your jobs.
Well, let me address that by backing up a little bit, and I want to go back to the Mike Brown situation in Ferguson. President Trumka, with the AFL-CIO, who's the president, visited the State Federation convention there, and he did something quite different and dramatic that nobody really was expecting, especially those who were there. Instead of giving the traditional presidential speech to a convention, he digressed and dealt with race, because we were in St. Louis and the conscious, the eyes of the nation was on Ferguson and St. Louis. And so President Trumka then issued this challenge that race is still prevalent, that even the labor movement hasn't done enough to address racism and to support African Americans in our country. And he called upon the delegation in the convention to begin to have the kind of dialogue about it, and issued his statement. In fact, it was a long speech about it, but that was sort of the most recent impetus for this whole dialogue around race within the labor movement, because from that came a commission on race in America, and the commission was really designed to really push this dialogue further down the road in the labor movement.
Okay, DeLayne, did you want to add anything?
Well, I think when you look at the labor movement and the civil rights movement, they're one and the same. And going forward, we can see that race has always been an issue, especially in the South, that has been used to divide working men and women. And so looking at the southern region and trying to coordinate a lot of the messaging around this, we just have to make sure, again, we keep our eyes on the prize and realize that issues such as race, we need to be talking about equality in the workplace. We need to talk about fair contracts. And when you put all of those things together, then you can move forward on an issue like race and really have some frank discussions. Because the people who are trying to divide us, they want us to talk about race, because the same people who are spitting out this hate, they're also spitting out anti-union rhetoric. They're also talking about how women don't need to have equal pay, what people need to do with their bodies. So again, we're in a situation where we need to really focus on building this movement and thinking of it as one, the labor movement and the civil rights movement.
I'm just going to ask a kind of a devil's advocate question. Because a lot of people, I think, well, I join a union and I want them to deal with the boss and I want them to get me higher wages and benefits. I don't want them talking to me about anything else. I'm happy the way I am with whatever prejudices and where I live, and I don't care about these other people and what the heck are these immigrants doing taking my jobs, and I don't want to work next to this gay guy. So how is it that unions, which are a fundamental organization that says an injury to one is an injury to all, how do we, now I'm on my side, now I'm talking about me, how do we show the value? Because I think people have to see that it makes a qualitative difference in their life to be involved in unity and solidarity. So how do either one of you see that happening?
Well, I think when you look at a situation when inequality happens in the workplace, when it happens to one, it rolls down, and again, it's used as a means to divide workers and really focusing on what they need to focus on, which is making sure that everybody has equality in the workplace, making sure that working conditions are safe. So when you take your eyes off of that and you start concentrating on issues that divide workers, then we miss the boat and then we can't move further. And again, I think that is what the head of corporations are trying to do by having these issues presented for us, but we need to make sure that all workers are receiving the same type of treatment. All workers are treated equal moving forward.
You know, Diane, we know that part of our challenge and part of our calling is to improve the lives of working families. But oftentimes there are elephants in the room. And this whole matter of inequality, racism, become elephants in the room that preclude us from uniting the way we ought to unite and building the kind of power and leverage that we want to build. And so on one hand, you know, we want to overlook it because our focus is on economics and on building leverage. On the other hand, we can't overlook it because no matter how much we try, the elephant is big and it keeps distracting you. And so at some point, I think that we continue the whole building of solidarity within the workplace, but at the same time, we are our brother's keeper to some extent, and we got to deal with those elephants. And to the extent that we're able to minimize, mitigate the elephant, it increases our ability to unite and actually be a leverage for workers.
Last week we had Donna DeWitt, who was a former AFL-CIO president in South Carolina, and she spoke about the need for education and about history and all this stuff we're hearing about the flag being a symbol of heritage, and how we got to get beyond that and really see how this is a symbol of slavery and what that meant. And what it continues to mean and why it needs to be removed. Could you talk a little, either one of you, about education, why that's so important at this point?
Well, it's obvious. Education is a means of opening folks' eyes to one, the issues, but two, where we need to go. And so with the AFL-CIO, we really are beginning the process of trying to educate our union members on this issue. We have a commission that's really working on a structured process of actually talking about race. In our previous executive council meeting in February that was held here in Atlanta, the advisory committee for the executive council met, and one of the main things that they pushed forward was this whole need to have a conversation around race. And what was interesting was we even had a state fed president who stood up and talked about how he discriminated and he had race, and it was through the union and education that allowed him to see that we are equal, we are all people, and changed his whole thought process about race. And so if he can be transformed through education, then we think we can do it to a whole lot of others.
So is the plan to do this across the country or in the South in particular? How is this going to get rolled out?
Yeah, we're going to have a series of these type of discussions, of course, that started last week in Washington, D.C., and roll these out across, because one of the things that we realize is that we have to take care of business in-house, make sure that we have these frank discussions internally before we can try to branch out and solve those issues. But internally, we have enough demographics within our own ranks where we can deal with this issue internally as we go forward.
So I'm going to make a comment, because it seems to me there's all different kinds of ways that education happens. Obviously, we hope here on the Labor Forum that having these conversations with different activists and union members and workers, that we're educating people about the real deal. And obviously people can read a book and they can watch a documentary and can have a discussion. But I have to say that in my years of doing this kind of work, it seems to me that the main thing is, frankly, it's on a picket line. It's in a struggle where if you're up against a boss or you're up against, some common enemy that's attacking, whether it's wages or your working conditions, the police attacking your community, whatever it is, that when those people who are affected come out together and they realize this person has got my back, this person is right by my side, and that we're in this together, that is where some of the fundamental transformation of people comes about. Would either of you like to make a comment about that? Because here's why I'm bringing it up. It seems to me that here we are, we've had this huge Black Lives Matter. We've had this huge fight for 15. Now there's the whole discussion that you have talked about with the demonstrations that are happening, not just in South Carolina, but around the country, around Confederate monuments and flags and other symbols of slavery and slaveocracy and discrimination. We've had a major Supreme Court decision on same-sex marriage, which is a huge transformation of people's consciousness in a relatively short time. So how is it that the labor movement cannot just get the people who are in unions to a discussion, but to get them to actually take some action to support the fight for equality, the fight against racism, the fight against discrimination.
I think we have two perfect examples, whether it's in New Orleans around new construction around the airport there, where you're having demonstrations where black workers matter. And you're having such a big project, and there's an opportunity for workers of all races to participate in this project in order to uplift their lives.
Well, you're gonna have to talk about this, because I don't know what this is. Do you know what this is? Paul?
No,
Okay.
go ahead.
Well, you have a project in New Orleans where again you have construction that's going to happen on the airport. And again, it's
Like a big new terminal? Or
big
a
new terminal, and you have an opportunity for a lot of people to participate in the workforce on this project. Just the same thing in Miami, where you have a World Center, where again people are calling for this to be a fair process for people of all colors to participate on this on the building of this World Center. So you have these movements that are taking place, whether it's in New Orleans, whether it's in Miami, where people are demanding that this goes beyond just Black Lives Matter, but people of color, like black workers matter. All workers matter, and all workers should be able to participate in a lot of these big projects that are happening in order for their communities to solve the inequality that's happening in their community.
But we're not.
All right, so what you're saying is that there's demonstrations, picket lines, the
Demonstrations,
construction
picket
unions
lines.
and the community have come together saying access to these jobs, open to women, open to everybody who's
Yes.
qualified.
Yes, and just as we see with the Fight for 15, just as we see with the For Respect Walmart campaign, when you look at just those two big fights, you see that everybody, you don't see color, you see everybody, all the workers coming together for dignity and respect. And that's the goal, and that's what we want to achieve with this labor movement. Like you said, a perfect example where people are just fighting and concentrating on the issues at hand. They realize they're all in the same boat.
We don't have all the answers. We don't have this strategic plan that we're executing that's going to guarantee 100% results. We're trying to work through this ourselves, trying to figure it out. So many things are popping up, from the Mike Brown situation in Louisville to all the police issues we had across the country, to Baltimore, to South Carolina. We got to where
To Atlanta?
to Atlanta. We got to do better. And I'm saying this as one of the staff and one of the leaders of the AFL-CIO. We've been working hard at it. We're trying. We are engaging in a lot of issues, some of the struggles that DeLayne talked about, but there are others. There's room for improvement here. And I think part of our reasoning for being here today is to educate, but also as a collective means of trying to seed our thoughts around what we could do in our own region to advance the Federation's strategic goals.
Let me ask you a question. So I'm UAW, and one of the things I always notice when I'm looking at pictures before I became a member, which was 1972, nope, 76, was I look at the old pictures of the big marches in Washington. I see all these UAW signs. I see Walter Reuther marching in civil rights demonstrations and stuff like that. So I'm just going to ask, where were the labor signs in Charleston, South Carolina?
Well, I can tell you that the Federation was present there through the state AFL-CIO, which is a body, an arm of the national AFL-CIO, and we had people on the ground. The state Fed leadership was engaged and involved with the victims and with the community.
His name is Aaron?
Aaron, yeah. Quite extensively, and was constantly communicating with the regional office and the national office about what else can we do, how do we provide more support. So we were present, perhaps not in the way that you remember UAW and others, and maybe that's part of where we need to look at and growing. But we were deeply present there during the past several weeks.
Oh, I don't doubt that because, you know, both Donna DeWitt and Leonard Riley talked about that. But I guess the reason I'm raising it is because it seems to me that we are in an age of hypervisibility. Pictures, Instagram, tweeting, Facebook, it's pictures. And so I looked at the pictures of the big demonstrations in Colombia, and I saw lots of different people. But what I didn't see was any sign from a union. I didn't see a federation banner. Now maybe they were there and I just didn't see the picture. But this struck me as, because in contrast actually to Ferguson, where, and I don't know if it's because Mike Brown's mom is a union member, but when I saw the pictures of demonstrations in Ferguson marches, I saw union signs. And I was really proud that there were union signs there. And so I just was wondering if it was, I don't know, it was a tremendous shock. This massacre was a tremendous shock. And so I don't know whether people felt maybe it wasn't appropriate in some way. But this is just, again, my sense that pictures live for a long, long time. And somebody, you know, a decade from now is going to look at those and say, you know, where was the labor movement, the organized labor movement?
And let me just comment, and maybe DeLayne has a comment also. But you're right, pictures matter. And I think something very, very different happened in South Carolina after the shooting. Typically, there would be outcries and all kind of demonstrations. But the difference here was that there was this unity. There were black and whites, red and yellow coming together in the same church and in the same setting, and you know, and I think while from our experience the sign would be there, I think the fact that something different was happening, a message was resonating that was different than the message in other parts of the country, and that was this whole sense of love and unity and healing that came forth. Now, I'm not saying that we've thrown our signs away, because we haven't. I got one in the car right now. If you don't mind, I'd like to go get it. But I think it's just an indication of something quite unique that was happening in South Carolina. One that I think really pushed some political leaders to places that they hadn't intended to go, such as the governor. Yeah, such as the governor.
We should say the South Carolina legislature apparently is meeting today, and there's a whole series of possible bills or resolutions regarding the Confederate battle flag that is on the grounds of the state capitol. Paul, did you have a question?
I saw a statement today read online from Reverend Barber with the NAACP in North Carolina, and speaking of the flag, he was saying we're going to have to go beyond just that issue. That there's issues of in terms of the relationship between a symbol and the kind of structural things that need to be fixed. Medicaid expansion, voter suppression. He named a list of issues. Can you talk about the relationship there?
Well, I mean, when you look at the state of South Carolina and what they've been concentrating on, especially during Governor Haley's administration, whereas it seems that they care more about corporations than actually the residents of South Carolina. So anytime when you rank so high on the poverty list, but yet you're giving over $400 million to a corporation to come in and set up shop.
She talked about Volvo.
Yes,
Yeah.
and so then you're looking at a state that chose not to expand Medicaid. So something that Charles said earlier is the state being the brother's keeper, and we would say no. And so when we're hearing from Reverend Barber, and that's the first I heard of that statement. I'm glad he made that statement. We do have to get beyond that. We need to really concentrate on the well-being of the residents of South Carolina. And how do we do that? I mean, there are some things that we can put in place and fight for, such as raising the minimum wage, making sure that everybody has health care, and going forward to make sure that everybody's taken care of.
And just let me comment. I think we have to be careful about putting out all of our emphasis and focus on a symbol. And because you can remove the symbol and yet not change the policies,
Exactly.
and our lifestyle and our lives remain the same.
Right.
And so, you know, we're dealing with folks who are smart, and they'll give us the symbol and yet not change laws and legislation to improve our lives. And so while I think it's important to do that, because I think it's a rallying cry, if we are effective and smart, we use the rallying cry to help push towards some structural changes.
Right.
Exactly.
And violence takes many forms. Our union put out a statement after Ferguson talking about the deindustrialization in the St. Louis area and the loss
Yeah.
of jobs. That's a form of violence, just like police violence and what we saw in Charleston. So we have to connect all these things.
That's true. Very true. Good point.
Well, what a great conversation we had. I hope
No,
that-
it's not over, is it?
I'm afraid the half hour is over, and so the labor forum is over for today, but we will definitely have to keep this conversation up. And I hope whenever this internal discussion, this town hall meeting or whatever, you make sure to let us know so that we can help promote it and let people know when it's happening. So again, all of you who are listening and watching on the YouTube channel, you are looking at Paul McLennan, DeLayne Adams, Charles Clark, and myself, Diane Mathowitz. We want to thank you for listening to the Labor Forum. We hope this was an informative program, and please do make your pledge to WRFG 89.3 FM, either online at wrfg.org or by calling any program anytime at 404-523-8989. Tuning in next week, we hope we will have another terrific program. Oh, we have the president of the Transit Workers Union next week.
Larry Hanley. Yeah.
Super.
Great guy.
Great guy. You just heard that from DeLayne, so that's a cue for you to make sure you tune in again next week. Bye for now.